Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I think this is live. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't done this in ages, and I'm way too late. I had originally planned to be live 3 hours ago, but preparing this podcast episode took a lot longer than I thought. Let me sit up correctly here. Maybe the camera is also a little bit. Now it's crooked. Okay, let me sort this out. Okay, so yeah, whatever. But I'm here. I'm trying to stream more often. Cheers, by the way. I'm on the start with the coffee and with the whiskey. But I'm on the coffee because I still have a lot to do. Record a podcast, to release the podcast. And then I will have to write a column, which I have to hand in because I can't do that tomorrow. Because tomorrow from 10 in the morning till about, I think, 6-ish in the afternoon, I'm going to play Diablo 4. Because, it's the pre-launch thing. And I got that, so I might as well. And I've really enjoyed playing the beta, and I've streamed a little bit of it, so I'll be doing that. Anyway, I will be trying to stream more because basically I also just want to release podcast episodes more regularly. So I hope that'll help me with it. We'll see. Yeah, I'm a bit. I need some coffee. I went bouldering earlier, and then I was eating, and now I'm feeling a little bit sleepy and still have a lot to do. By the way, bouldering, this is what my hands look like now. This is my reality. I've got way too addicted to this shit. But it's good. It's I'm seeing the results, mostly here though. Like that muscle's like just that actually is this hard to show that muscle, but it's like it's getting there. Yeah. Anyway, but we are here to drink your beer and steal your rum at the point of gun. No, we are here to record a podcast. So let's see if all of this is working as it's intended to be. 1, 2. We're testing this. 1, 2. Hello. Bam, 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 bam. Testing. 1, 2. Intended to be 1, 2.
That sounds good.
We're testing this. 1, 2. Hello. Bam, bam, bam. Bam, 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 bam. Okay, that sounds good. I think we can get right into it. Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm going to record the show and put it out, and then I'm going to record the show and then end the stream. I'm not going to stream putting the show out tonight, and then I have to do some more work, and then is there like a mosquito on my wall? Motherfucker. Okay, do I have a... Yeah, I'm going to kill this mosquito. Give me a second. Otherwise, it's going to sting me during the show. Motherfuckers are getting uppity. It's getting warm. Yeah, so I'm just gonna do the podcast recording because I have stuff to do afterwards. But we can see each other tomorrow. 10 in the morning for me, relatively early. Gonna get myself some coffee. Start with the coffee. It's got a little. I loved it. I bought this recently. It's got a little hip flask. I just had to buy that. Anyway, let's get going here. Thanks for being there, and I'm sorry for not streaming in like a year or something. It's been crazy. Anyway, let's get the show on the road. I should turn this Should turn the warning on. Here we go. Warning. Hello, Astral Fortified Coffee. I haven't fortified it, but I could. Like, it's got like a little fortification flask. It's pretty good. I'm trying to stay sober tonight too, so I haven't had much sleep recently, so I think it's a better idea. Anyway, let's see if I can still do this. I haven't done many podcasts recently either, so here goes nothing. And then this when I have to burp, just when I want to do the intro. Great. You're listening to The Private Citizen, a podcast for critical thinkers. This is episode 155 for Thursday, the 1st of June, 2023. The Twitter Files, Part 5. Hello, everybody. My name is Fab. I'm your host, as usual, coming to you live from beautiful city of Düsseldorf in Germany. Where it's very summery. We've had sun for about a week. I love it. It's great. It's warm. It's I've been enjoying the weather, and I'm back with another episode. We'll get into all of that. Thanks for having you on the show. As I say. Thanks that you're listening to the show. Is what I mean. I haven't done this in a while. I'm out of it, but at least I'm doing it live again, which means if you are watching this on Twitch, you can interact in chat. When it comes to feedback, you can give me live feedback, and everybody else can watch a recording of that if they want to see me doing the show. I don't know why you would, but if you want to, you can go to YouTube. All the links are, as usual, if you go to privatecitizen.press, that's the website. It's got show notes. This is episode 155. All the links are in there. Everything's in there. So, you can enjoy that if you want to. I've not been releasing as much podcast episodes as I should. I know. It's kind of it's the way it is. It's just like I've explained this in the last episode. It's work. It's I can't really change that. I've decided that I'm gonna. I was for a long time was trying to make up for the whole thing that I wanted to have an episode every week, at least like on average. But I dropped a lot of episodes last year, and this year hasn't been much kinder. And I'm calling bankruptcy on that. I can't catch up at this point. So I have a new plan. The new plan is to give you as many episodes as I can. One part of the plan is that I'm going to stream more, and I'm going to stream these to kind of also set a schedule and force me to record them. Not that I kind of need to be forced, because by that I don't mean, I like doing this show. It's just like, basically what I have so many projects and so many things I want to do. I mean, it's all want to do because I work for myself, right? Some of it is for money, right? Or more direct money. This show also supports me, of course, monetarily, but some of it is for money. Some of it is stuff I want to do, and it's just more than I can do. And I've kind of accepted that. I've accepted that I've just have too many things I want to do. This podcast, I get a newsletter, stuff I'm writing to get paid, streaming, all this kind of stuff. So I'm just gonna. I have a new Zen mode of approach. I'm just gonna take it as it comes, and I'm just going to try my best. And that goes for this podcast as well. And as I kind of mentioned in previous episodes, I'm not going to drop, I'm in this thing where I'm doing a lot of exercise currently. So I don't want to drop that. I kind of like that. I go bouldering a lot. I went bouldering today. My hands are I have these all these calluses now. But I feel really good doing that. So I kind of don't want to drop any of that either. But let's stop with the Meta stuff. I think we should get into the topic. So the topic for today is obviously the Twitter files. This is going to be, it's not like, once again, I'm not going by the parts as they are numbered by the Twitter file authors. This is the 5th episode on the Twitter files. And I had this plan for a long time. I announced this like months ago that I would do it. And so, yeah, after this episode, there's going to be more Twitter files, of course. I don't know when. There's some other stuff I kind of want to lay the groundwork for first and do stuff about. So I don't know, but like this is not going to be the last episode on the Twitter files. As we know, the Twitter files have kind of ended because Elon Musk is kind of was in this spat. I did an episode about that with Substack. And so, people like Matt Taibbi, whose work we're going to discuss today, kind of lost his favor. And so, the project has ended, but there was still after that, there was still stuff that came out, and there's still, I'm way behind on all of this. So, I'm going to pick the topics and arrange them as I want, like pick the stuff that I find interesting and arrange it, as I want to. So just very quick before we get into today's meat of the show, just a very quick recap. I mean, there's a Twitter files tag in the show notes. If you go to privatecitizen.press, there's also a link in these show notes that you can click on. If you haven't listened to previous episodes, if you want to catch up, you can do that. If you don't want to, here's a very quick refresh on what happened when Elon Musk took over Twitter. He gave a number of journalists, among them Matt Taibbi, who we're going to talk about today. This is like the stuff we're talking about today is like his reporting, access to internal messages at Twitter, like from their Slack and emails, like internal emails and messages from the employees. And he gave like these reporters indirect access. They could like search for certain terms. And, the company would also filter it. But basically what he did is something unprecedented. We never had this before. We never had like a CEO come in and then give the press access like this. And so basically what this showed was that the US government, mostly through a number of NGOs and the FBI, was basically censoring Twitter. Twitter users, the discourse on Twitter, on a relatively wide variety of subjects, and I've talked about some of this stuff in the past. And but the intention is with this stuff was always to basically strengthen government narratives, whatever it was on. SARS-CoV-2, Russian election meddling is what we're going to talk about today a lot. Doesn't matter. Basically, they were pushing the government narrative and suppressing dissidents or critical thinkers. With other words, it's classic propaganda, right? Push your message and try to discredit or censor. It's like kind of propaganda reinforced by censorship. Censor the people you don't want to spread their message, or you don't censor the message you don't want to have propagandized, and then propagandize your own. Sorry, I'm just gonna have a drink here. I feel parched. Anyway, that's kind of the recap, and so let's get into what we're gonna talk about in today's episode. So, first off, it's worth pointing out that a lot of this stuff is about Twitter, of course, because with this project, with these Twitter files, we had Elon Musk giving an internal view into what was going on at Twitter. But there are many other tech companies and social media platforms, and from what we've seen from inside of Twitter alone, it is apparent that this stuff was also going on at other companies, like Facebook and Microsoft and stuff like that. But we don't have access to that because of the reporting on the Twitter files, of course. Far from journalists seeing what was happening at Twitter through Musk and going, hey, maybe we can get sources at other big tech companies. No, we talked about this before, the coverage of this. Journalists largely removed didn't cover this, and even were actively writing stories fighting this coverage and of course attacking Elon Musk, which under normal circumstances I would be glad about. I've talked about this before. I've been waiting for decades for the Silicon Valley tech press to wake up and stop idolizing Elon Musk. Now sadly they're doing this now, and that means they're not doing this because of Elon Musk, but because they want to. I'm not saying they're doing this on purpose, but the end result is they're suppressing this coverage, and so we don't have any insight into other companies. But what we know from this, just from people at Twitter being on email lists with other companies and the FBI and whatever, we know that other companies were involved. So we can assume it is kind of obvious that other social media and tech companies were, contacted and coerced in the same way by the government, by the US government, as Twitter was. So we know that these other companies include Facebook, LinkedIn, so Microsoft, Yahoo, Reddit. Interestingly, Wikimedia, which is the foundation that runs Wikipedia, which is supposed to be a public, in the service of the public, really. It's not like a normal company, really. But Wikimedia was involved. Pinterest, Cloudflare, which sounds weird at first, but is very significant, because Cloudflare, what Cloudflare does is they largely provide CDN services, and also services where they prevent your website from being DDoSed, which basically means when you visit a site that uses Cloudflare protection, you go to Cloud. They have their servers in front of. Let's say I'd be, not that I am, but let's say I'd be using Cloudflare for Private Citizen.press. So Private Citizen.press is hosted by a hosting provider called Netlify. If I was using Cloudflare, if you typed in Private Citizen.press, you wouldn't, as you're now, immediately be directed towards Netlify, my hosting company. You would go through Cloudflare first. And they're using this. Cloudflare does this, of course, because that's how they can weed out people trying to DDoS your site, which is legitimate, but because their service is used by so many websites, they're now basically, Cloudflare is in control of a lot of traffic, right? So if Cloudflare decides that you are not trustworthy, you are not allowed to visit these websites, which happens sometimes. Pretty much anybody must have seen by now this page that comes up. You're trying to visit a Cloudflare. Sometimes they're just, most of the time they're letting you through, but they're going, we are currently evaluating your internet connection or whatever, and please hang on. And then it takes a few seconds and they redirect you to the site. But they also block people. So in the past there was a interesting little brouhaha when they started blocking people using the Tor network, anonymized internet routing, basically. But which of course was, their argument for it was that people were using Tor to attack websites, which is somewhat true, but it's not really something you can run a DDoS over. So it was a little bit of a weird argument. But anyway, let's not get into the specifics there. But, Cloudflare has a lot of power on the internet because of that. So they were involved. Twitch, which I'm streaming across right now, which means Amazon, which owns Twitch. YouTube, of course. So that means Google. And, of course, also Apple. Not that Apple really has a social network, but they're mostly important because I guess of the App Store, and also because of iCloud and stuff. I don't know. I don't know how the censorship comes in. I mean, they also have a messenger, but that's end-to-end encrypted, so they can't look into that. But anyway, so we know that these companies were also connected somehow, as we will see later, through the FBI with all these government agencies and NGOs that were on behest of the US government, basically censoring the internet, and are probably doing so now. I mean, we don't even know. Musk has never delivered on his promise to give us the tools to see if Twitter is still doing this kind of stuff and how they are doing this stuff, so we don't know. Musk is maybe now on the side of these people, it's an tinfoil hat theory, but he kind of cut off the Twitter files reporting, so who knows? We assume it was because of Substack, but who knows? So we really don't know, and I mean, it's sure that it is almost certain that it's still going on at these other companies who are. I mean, journalists largely suppressed this reporting about Twitter and discrediting people like Taibbi and stuff like that, and so it's certainly sites like Facebook are out of the limelight, and as far as this stuff goes. Now, this is an interesting topic that I'm not going to go into in detail in this episode, how this all works, but basically, Matt Taibbi has been researching this, and Matt Taibbi has a media organization basically now on Substack called Racket News, so with freelancers working for him, and I think people working for him full time. And he's been calling this the censorship industrial complex, which is, of course, in reference to Eisenhower's famous farewell address where he warned the American people about the military-industrial complex. And so Racket has, a few weeks ago, they published like this report on this phenomenon, which I'm going to talk about. And there's some more Twitter files on this stuff, which I'm also going to talk about on the show, but I'm thinking I might do the censorship industrial complex episode before. But if you're interested, I put the infographic they have in the show notes, and there you can see how it's like this network of basically the government on one side, and then the big tech companies on the other side, and then all these foundations and NGOs and fact-checking organizations and think tanks and for-profit organizations, and also scarily academic initiatives, all working together in this big thing. So much just to point out before we get into the Twitter specifics, that even if you don't care about Twitter, and you maybe because of Elon Musk or whatever, it's just don't assume that this is a Twitter problem. This is something that we have to assume, and I think is clear by now, has happened, or it is still happening at pretty much any big tech company and any big social media platform. It's just that we don't know. We can just only assume, right? It's kind of like when Snowden uncovered the spying the NSA was doing. There were some links to let's say I'm in Germany, right? The German BND doing that, but there was no material from the BND. But through those Snowden documents, it was clear that the BND, so the German equivalent of the CIA, basically was cooperating with the NSA in doing this. So doing the same thing, basically spying on the German people. We didn't have Snowden revelations, but it was relatively clear that was happening. So just be aware that this does not only apply to Twitter. But let's get into the story, how this kind of censorship. I mean, I've talked about a lot of this in the past, but this episode today is about how it came to pass and how it was organized, and basically the role of the FBI in the whole thing. So what we're basically seeing is that the FBI kind of started this whole thing, and then I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in this episode, but they became what they themselves called the belly button for the US government. So basically because the FBI was so involved early in this, they became kind of the government agency to coordinate this kind of thing for all other, as even if you don't want to talk about the censorship industrial complex, like this kind of censorship network, right? How it worked, and they kind of became the linchpin organization for it all. And there's some interesting technical details on how they did it. That might be a future Twitter Files episode, but we'll see. So basically, before we get into that, we have to one important thing I have to say in the beginning here is that sorry about that. I'm gonna fix that in post. One important thing I have to say about this is that, like, one of the reasons I believe that all of this is true is that the FBI has never denied it, which kind of speaks volumes. So in this one of these Twitter file stories, Matt Taibbi writes, after weeks of Twitter Files reports detailing close coordination between the FBI, and we talked about these in the past as well on the show, between the FBI and Twitter in moderating social media content, the Bureau issued a statement Wednesday. It didn't refute allegations. Instead, it decried, quote, conspiracy theorists pushing, quote, misinformation whose, quote, sole aim is to discredit the agency, which is a classical, PR ploy. I mean, you can't deny you did it because you did it, and it might come out in the future. So you can't deny that. So what you're doing is you're deflecting, right? So they went on the attack against, Matt Taibbi and Bari Weiss. And there might also be an episode about what happened to Taibbi as a result of this, like IRS investigations, stuff like that. But, and basically, I think Congress people calling for him to be arrested or something like this. So they just deflected, which to me, as a journalist who is very versed in, often in my role as I often write about IT security. Often I have very clear evidence that something happened. Let's say from a security researcher, right? And they basically give me the goods, and I can basically see what they did, and I can see that there's a security vulnerability. And then, I document all of that, and then I contact the company, or, I contact the government sometimes about stuff. And I'm very versed in these kind of, over the last 10 years, I've become very, very experienced, one could say, in reading between the lines. If you ask a PR department, and we're talking about a good PR department, people who know what they're doing, not some small company who just makes shitty mistakes, but when, government agencies or big companies, and they know that that they made a mistake, then it's very telling, like, what they don't say, right? To read between the lines and see what they don't say. And one of the cardinal rules of a journalist is, like, you're writing a story about something that you believe is happened. You asked the people, you asked the company, like, does this security vulnerability exist? And of course, they know that it exists, but they don't want to admit to it existing, but they can't lie about it because that might come out. So they do stuff like say, like, we take the security of our customers very seriously, or stuff like that, right? Or they deflect, like the FBI is doing here in this case. So I'm relatively like, this answer pretty much tells me that this reporting by Matt Taibbi and other people hit to the truth of the matter, and they just didn't. They don't even want to comment on it, because if this is all as far-fetched as is alleged to be, as many people say, it's just like Taibbi and Musk like making things up or exaggerating things, then the FBI could say that, and they could actually prove it with like their data, right? So that they don't say this is kind of telling. And this is also why, I mean, I talked about this in the past with Nord Stream. This is why I'm so dismayed that journalists that are reporting about this don't go to the US government and ask them, like, did you do it, right? And I mean, the reason for that, as I explained, is because the US government, you put them in a bad situation. If you believe they did it, as I think many journalists do, they just don't want to get to the truth, because that would be a problem. But, a good journalist would be asking that, because you're putting, like, even if the other side lies to you, at least you getting them on the record, right? You get them you get them to lie on the record, so you can later on, when it comes out, and it always comes out sooner or later, you have a story then, because back then the government lied to you, or whoever lied to you. But anyway, so they haven't denied it, so I'm pretty sure it's true. So researching this, Taibbi says that basically the FBI was, as he calls it, acting as doorman to a vast program of social media surveillance and censorship, encompassing agencies across the federal government, from the State Department to the Pentagon to the CIA. The operation is far bigger than the reported 80 members of the Foreign Influence Task Force, FITF. So that was how the Twitter fight started, reporting on that, which also facilitates requests. So that was basically the original story, and that the government stuck to, that there were only 80 people involved at the FBI office in this Foreign Influence Task Force. So the operation was bigger than the reported 80 members of the Foreign Influence Task Force, which also facilitates requests from a wide array of smaller actors, from local cops to media to state governments. A chief end result was that thousands of official, quote, reports flowed to Twitter from all over through the FITF and the FBI's San Francisco field office. Despite its official remit being foreign influence, the FITF and the SF FBI office became a conduit for mountains of domestic moderation requests from state governments, even local police. So basically, the government was saying, like, this is about foreign influence, but that's not what happened. Basically, everybody in the government was sending requests through the FBI to Twitter saying, this is bad content, we want this removed, or we want these people blocked or banned or whatever, visibility filtered. So interestingly, one of the main defenses I've read from lots of journalists who basically say this is a non-story, they're often saying that this wasn't actually censorship. I mean, it's not state censorship, so it's not censorship, under the German constitution, for example. But they're saying that it wasn't censorship because basically the argument is that the FBI was basically suggesting that Twitter and other, social media sites take action on certain accounts or tweets. If you really look into this, and Taibbi does in this like first story, and got links obviously in all this in show notes, private citizen, not press, but like, so what Taibbi shows is basically that the FBI was tailoring their searches for stuff to Twitter's moderation policies. He says FBI complaints were almost always depicted somewhere as a possible terms of service violation, quote, even in the subject line. Twitter executives noticed the FBI appeared to be assigning personnel to look for Twitter violations. They have some folks in the Baltimore field office and the HQ that are just doing keyword searches for violations. This is probably the 10th request I've dealt with in the last 5 days, remarked Stacia Cadile. So that's one of the executives at Twitter working with us. And they did this specifically, so the defense that they have now that has been put out through the press, and that this was just a suggestion, right? So that they, because they, the government knew that they were in the wrong here. They're not supposed to censor, public speech on the internet, especially not from a US context where freedom of speech is a very lofty ideal and enshrined in the Constitution and a principle in lots of pretty much all of the jurisprudence in the US. As we'll see comments in Twitch chat, like the mafia suggests you pay protection, pretty much, yeah. So, and we're going to see how they did this, but that's a very apt, like it's Tony Soprano kind of thing. It's very apt. This is how they did it. Actually, I like the mafia. This is very Tony Soprano when I think about it. So basically, they knew that what they were doing was like, against lots of freedom of speech kind of provisions, and against doing this, it was against the FBI's actual mission, to basically investigate domestic speech, right? The FBI was saying they were doing this to combat foreign influence, but in fact, if you look at what they blocked, often it was just like, US politicians or like journalists or whatever. So what they did is they basically used Twitter's terms of service as a shield, right? So they had content they wanted removed and basically made sure that would contravene Twitter's terms of service. And one way how they did it probably is also like Twitter changing, like over the past few years. Twitter, and especially after the first election where Trump's election in 2016, after Hillary Clinton lost, and with Russiagate and everything, they basically Twitter changed its rules, and this is like kind of. So what the government basically did is they put pressure on Twitter to change their terms of service in certain ways, and then they used these changes to basically moderate content, or as I would call it, censor stuff on Twitter. Now, the most interesting thing about this to me is that this supposed foreign interference in the election that caused all of this, that caused the US government to get interested in moderating, some would say, or I would again call it censor, domestic speech, was supposed foreign influence. Very specifically from Russia. But it kind of feels like, if you look at all of this stuff, and especially from the Twitter perspective, so the stuff that these Taibbi and other authors had access to was largely Twitter executives talking about this. So they get pressure, they get requests from the FBI and stuff, and they get told that there's foreign influence, and they can't find it. So quoting from this one of the Twitter files threads, Twitter executives struggled against government claims of foreign interference supposedly occurring on their platform and others. The hashtag Twitter files show, the Twitter files, why did I leave that in? That's hard to read. Anyway, I can probably change that on the fly somehow. Got too many text editors open. Give me a second. Sorry, I'm just editing the show notes live on the show. Now you see how the sausage is made. It's just like that hashtag annoys me. Where was I? Boop, 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 boop. Sorry. Yeah, let me remove that. Let me just call it Twitter files. There you go. That's easier. Anyway, stop that auto refresh as well. We don't need that. And let's go on with the show. So, Twitter executives struggled against government claims of foreign interference supposedly occurring on their platform and others. The Twitter files show execs under constant pressure to validate theories of foreign influence and then unable to find evidence for key assertions. Quote, found no links to Russia, says one analyst, but suggests he could brainstorm, in air quotes, or, a quote, but like brainstorm to find a stronger connection. So basically, make it up is what they mean. Extremely tenuous circumstantial chance of being related, says another. In a key email, news that the State Department was making a wobbly public assertion of Russian influence led an executive, the same one with the OGA pass. So Taibbi talks, there's a lot of like mention of OGA, other government agency, which is a often used acronym for the CIA. So there was a person, one of these executives who used to work at the CIA before, to make a damning admission. Due to lack of technical evidence on our end, I've generally left it be, waiting for more evidence, he says. Our window on that is closing, given that the government partners are becoming more aggressive on attribution. Translation, more aggressive government partners had closed Twitter's window of independence. Other government agencies in air quotes, ended up sharing intelligence through the FBI and FITF, not just with Twitter, but Yahoo, Twitch, Cloudflare, LinkedIn. We've heard about this. So basically, what they're saying here is the window of independence is closing. We're going to talk about that later a bit more. But basically, they were, as Rosie says, they were suggesting this in a Sopranos kind of way, and then they weren't, Twitter wasn't producing enough evidence for this foreign interference, and then they were actually threatening to, the window of opportunities closing. By that, it means like the government will start legislating, or actually forcing us to take the stuff down. And once this, basically Twitter at first fighting, they were basically, they were getting requests of the government saying there is, and the press saying there is Russian interference, and Twitter was looking at their internal data and couldn't find it. So at first they said that, and then they got more and more pressure, and then they just started complying, because with the request, because they were like, we can't fight them, and this then led to, of course, other stuff. I mean, I've talked about this in previous episodes. This led to other stuff being censored of Twitter, or as Taibbi writes, many people wonder if internet platforms receive direction from intelligence agencies about moderation of foreign policy news stories. It appears Twitter did, in some cases by way of the FITF and FBI. These reports are far more factually controversial than domestic counterparts. One Inter report lists accounts tied to Ukraine neo-Nazi propaganda. This includes assertions that Joe Biden helped orchestrate the coup in 2014 and, quote, put his son on the board of Burisma. Often intelligence came in the form of brief reports, followed by long lists of accounts simply deemed to be pro-Maduro, pro-Cuba, pro-Russian, etc. One report says a site, quote, documenting purported rights abuses committed by Ukrainians is directed by Russian agents. So often this is like, a lot of this, you can't like verify if this is true, but some of it is true. It's just, some of it is obviously, I mean, there were war crimes committed by Ukrainians in the war. We know this, but like there were still accounts that were being visibility filtered and deleted, and messages that were basically disappeared, even though they seem to be factual. And we talked about this in the case of COVID before as well. But clearly because they were going against the narrative that the government wanted to have out there. Intel about the shady origin of these accounts might be true, but so might at least be some of the information in them about neo-Nazis, rights abuses in Donbass, even about our own government. Should we block such material? This is a difficult speech dilemma. Should the government be allowed to prevent Americans and others from seeing pro-Maduro or anti-Ukrainian accounts? Often Intel reports are just a long list of newspapers, tweets, or YouTube videos guilty of, quote, anti-Ukraine narrative, which, that is in a country that purportedly holds free speech as one of its highest ideals, especially also freedom of the press. Why would an anti-Ukraine narrative be, why would you delete that? right? I mean, it would be almost be different if the US was actually in a war against Russia, or they admitted they'd be in a war, because, in a war these rules change, but like they're not. So why it makes no sense. So basically, because the FBI, through this foreign interference task force, started this whole thing, they then just basically became what they themselves call the belly button for the US government. And they started basically interfacing as an interface. So all the CIA and the State Department and government officials would go to them with stuff they wanted deleted, and the FBI would use Twitter's terms of service to get Twitter to delete it, right? And make it look like, if the information ever came out, which it did thanks to Elon Musk, make it look like they're not forcing Twitter to do it, which they can't legally, but they're just, suggest, hey, this is against your terms of service. Shouldn't you be deleting this? As Taibbi writes, they eventually settled on an industry call via Signal. This is funny, by the way. In an impressive display of operational security, Chan, this was the guy at Twitter, No, this is an FBI guy. Chan circulated private numbers of each company's chief moderation officer, chief censor, I guess, in a Word document marked, quote, Signal phone numbers, subject lined list of numbers, in an email, right, which is only transport. In the best case scenario it's not end-to-end encrypted. It's just, transport security, which is interesting. Twitter was taking requests from every conceivable government body, beginning with the Senate Intel Committee, which seemed to need reassurance Twitter was taking FBI direction. Requests arrived and were escalated from all over, from the Treasury, the NSA, virtually every state, the HHS, that's the Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, I think, from the FBI and DHS, which is Department of Homeland Security, and more. They also received an astonishing variety of requests from officials asking for individuals they didn't like to be banned. Here, the Office for Democrat and House Intel Committee Chief Adam Schiff, which is a major douchebag, asked Twitter to ban journalist Paul Sperry. Even Twitter declined to honor Schiff's request at the time because it was so preposterous. Sperry was later suspended, however. So, you got like a House, a member of the House of Representatives in the US going to Twitter asking for a journalist to be banned. Let that just sink in for a moment. So much for freedom of the press. And like often, if you look at it, many of these requests were like based on bullshit reasoning, or in some cases, no reasoning at all, basically. Often it was just like the FBI had some like boilerplate text they slapped on, and they had a list of 100 accounts. And Twitter would, they didn't take action on everything, but they would largely comply. So it's not like a hard and fast like censorship thing, right? It's not like Stalin and the Soviet Union. We have a state censorship bureau. Everything goes through there before it goes out. It's much more of a fluid situation. It actually reminds me, I'm long-time listeners of my podcast kind of know I'm famous for Nazi Germany references, which often just happen for me because I've studied it so much in university for such a long time. I know a lot about how the Nazi state worked, and it's obviously very, very impactful in German history, and and society, and I'm a German, what can I say? But it reminds me a lot about how the Nazi state worked. Obviously they also had a state censorship apparatus. So I'm not talking about how their censorship worked, but a lot in the Nazi state worked. We have a German term. It's called vorauseilender Gehorsam. It kind of means to comply with an order before the order is even issued. So the Nazi state didn't work like Hitler. A lot of times didn't. It wasn't like Hitler writing down an order and then everybody following an order. It was more like Hitler giving speeches and people trying to figure out what he wanted and trying to preemptively do what he wanted. So there's a it's very famous in German historical science that there's many books written on this, actually trying to tie Hitler specifically to the Holocaust, because he didn't sign. I mean, there is an order he signed, but like it wasn't never like, let's exterminate the Jews or something. Like there wasn't any paper signed. It was basically him giving speeches and talking to high government officials about this, but only talking about it, like not writing it down, right? And they would then start orchestrating all of this horrible stuff. So I mean, there were lots of orders in the Nazi state. Don't get me wrong. Like Hitler wrote lots of stuff. There are lots of specific orders from the Führer to people, especially when the military stuff is concerned. All of that is in paper. But there was also a lot of things where they just didn't write stuff down, and there weren't direct orders, right? It was basically Hitler talking to the head of the I don't know, the Wehrmacht maybe, and explaining like this is what's important in the war, and then they would go and basically do what they think Hitler wanted done. So this is what this reminds me of a little bit, because it's not the government saying, okay, censor this, censor that. Here's a government directive. We don't want any pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian stuff on Twitter. Right? This is not how it worked. It was more like the government wanted this done, and through a government organization, the FBI, there wasn't an order to the FBI do this. It was more like an understanding that the current, that not even, the funny thing is, it's not even the people in power, right? Because this started because Hillary Clinton lost, and one of the reasons that is, why lots of observers like Taibbi and other people who have been writing about it say the FBI is involved, is because there was a large anti-Trump contingent in the FBI, right? So basically, a lot of this was actually not in the interest of the head of the government, Trump, but was kind of orchestrated by this bureaucracy below, who was convinced that Trump had won by Russian meddling, and now was convinced that, basically the public on the internet, the public was manipulated by Russian propaganda on Twitter and other websites, and was convinced that this all happened, and then wanted Twitter to prove, which we're going to get into now, but like they basically wanted Twitter to prove this, and when Twitter couldn't, they were still convinced that this had happened, and they were very determined to fight it. So basically the FBI, which, if you think about it, at the time was a government agency under the US government run by Donald Trump, who was saying this Russian influence stuff is not happening, but like somehow, so it's kind of completely not like the Nazi state. Is kind of like the opposite, because they were doing the opposite, but it's like, as a government organization, a lot of these bureaucracies were kind of assuming that a large part of it's not even the government, it's kind of like the future government of the apparatus, who really, really didn't like Trump, and they were kind of assuming, probably the next government, which was true, that in opposition to Trump, they were kind of doing this. So I guess now that I think about it, I never thought of, like, I've prepared this episode like literally months ago now. I've thought about this stuff a lot, but like this just only occurs to me right now. That is this very interesting. That's probably the reason why it happened so organically and why it wasn't written down, and there was no, there could have been a legislative change, right? You could have said, okay, we got evidence for this Russian interference, so we're going to pass some laws. This is how democracy is supposed to work, right? We're going to pass some laws that require companies like Twitter to censor certain information. I mean, yes, that is somewhat unlikely because of the, parts of the Constitution and, freedom of speech allowances in the US. So it's and this being in parts of the law which you can't change or can change, very hard to change. So it's somewhat unlikely in that regard, but I guess you could have, passed some legislation, but they couldn't because the head of the government was completely not interested in this. So this is probably why it evolved in such a around the back Tony Soprano kind of way. Yeah, that's very interesting. That just occurred to me right now while I was recording this. And it also, of course, now makes it easy to kind of say this never happened. This wasn't censorship, right? This was just, concerned government. How would you characterize this? Concerned government employees who happen to work for the FBI? I don't know. Being concerned with, helping Twitter enforce its terms of service. It's kind of weird because obviously there is a foreign influence task force, right? And they have this mandate, and the government wasn't shy about saying that this was happening and you need to fight it. But on the other hand, now they're kind of pretending, and lots of journalists are kind of pretending it never happened. Really weird. But yeah, so one important part of this is, I think, how Twitter was actually coerced into doing this. And I started talking about this a little bit. Now I want to get into the specifics here. So how did it happen that a social network which really has incentives not to moderate its content under US law, right? Under this, was it 302, 502, whatever, under this directive, basically, that, basically there's the safe harbor provision that social networks cannot be sued like a newspaper. They're not responsible for what people post on their network, because they're not responsible for the users. They're not editors like on a newspaper where, if somebody writes something for a news website, the news website can get sued if they made a mistake, or if that actually is wrong and it caused damages to somebody. You can't do that on Twitter because Twitter is not responsible for what its users put on there, but that's under the provision that they don't execute, that they don't editorialize, right? They don't moderate. Well, they have to moderate within the legal bounds, but they don't moderate politically or whatever. As soon as they do that, they're basically editing a newspaper or a magazine, albeit a large one, and then they would lose this, and this provision, safe harbor provision, they could get sued. So they're under an incentive not to do this. So how come they started doing it? And there, of course, is also a Twitter Files story about this. Again, links in the show notes, Private Citizen Press. But basically what it boils down to is what people in the trade call paper trading. And this has nothing to do with dogs. It has everything to do with the press. So how did this all start out? Matt Taibbi recaps this as follows. In August 2017, so this is a year after Hillary lost the election, when Facebook decided to suspend 300 accounts with, quote, suspected Russian origin, Twitter wasn't worried. Its leaders were sure they didn't have a Russia problem. Executives agreed the best PR strategy was to say nothing on record and quietly hurl reporters at Facebook. Twitter is not the focus of inquiry into Russian election meddling right now. The spotlight is on FB, wrote Public Policy VP Colin Crowell. Colin Crowell? In September 2017, after a cursory review, Twitter informed the Senate it suspended 22 possible Russian accounts, so they nonetheless started an investigation into themselves. It informed the Senate it suspended 22 possible Russian accounts and 179 others with quote possible links to those accounts amid a larger set of roughly 2,700 suspects manually examined. Receiving these meager results, a furious Senator Mark Warner from Virginia, ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, I'm sure that's a coincidence, held an immediate press conference to denounce Twitter's report as, quote, frankly inadequate on every level. After meeting with congressional leaders, Crowell wrote, Warner has political incentives to keep this issue at the top of the news, so this is an internal email, maintain pressure on us and the rest of the industry to keep producing material for them. Crowell added Democrats were taking cues from Hillary Clinton, who that week said it's time for Twitter to stop dragging its heels and live up to the fact that its platform is being used as a tool for cyber warfare. Cyber warfare. So basically what Twitter then did, so this obviously political pressure from people, like Hillary Clinton, who, lost the election and wasn't prepared to admit that this was because of votes, but it, must have been because the election was hacked or meddled with. So Twitter created a task force to investigate itself further and now find evidence of this Russian meddling and then, disappear it from its platform to satisfy the government. Or politicians, this is we're talking, Mark Warner is a Democrat, so, he's in the opposition, but, when I say the government, I also mean Congress, basically. And members of Congress who are not on the current government, as I mentioned before. And with current, I mean, in this case, the Trump government. So they created this task force and tried to find this evidence. But the problem was there wasn't any evidence to find. The Russia task force started mainly with data shared from counterparts at Facebook, centered around accounts supposedly tied to Russia's Internet Research Agency, IRA. But the search for Russian perfidy was a dud. October the 13th, 2017, no evidence of a coordinated approach. All of the accounts found seem to be lone wolf type of activity, different timing, spending, targeting, less than $10,000 in ad spend. October 23rd, finished with investigation, 2,500 full manual account reviews. We think this is exhaustive. 32 suspicious accounts and only 17 of those are connected with Russia. Only 2 of those have significant spend, one of which is Russia Today, remaining under $10,000 in spend. So basically what happened now is that this created a PR problem for Twitter. And, I talked about this kind of thing in my Russiagate episode. Basically, officials in the government and, in the intelligence community convinced the press that there was Russian meddling. because they themselves believed there was Russian meddling, and so they all started to believe, and the press started to write about this, and this is something I've thought about, like, back in the day. I've thought about with Mike on this. We had many discussions where I was very skeptical that, this IRA and the Facebook ads actually swayed the election, just based on, kind of, I don't know, knowing how propaganda works and the internet and common sense, really. Not on data. But we see this, like, borne out in data now. There was no this. And many people to this day believe this happened because the press never did any significant stories retracting this. But basically the myth was the Russians are running this large propaganda campaign on Facebook and on Twitter, and they basically changed political opinion so much that they messed with the results of the election. Now, Twitter couldn't find any of this. And now they had a PR problem because, the parts of the government or the apparatus in Washington were convinced this was happening. They convinced the press that it was happening, and Twitter's going, no, we can't find anything, so they get flagged. Twitter's search, finding, quote, only 2 significant accounts, quote, one of which is Russia Today, was based on the same data that later inspired panicked headlines like Russian influence reached 126 million through Facebook alone. The failure of the Russia task force to produce material worsened the company's PR crisis. As Congress threatened costly legislation, so this is like, this is where we lose the independence. This is where the thumb screws come in. As Congress threatened costly legislation and Twitter began, and Twitter was subject to more bad press fueled by the committee, the company changed its tune about the smallness of its Russia problem. Even as Twitter prepared to change its ads policy, and remove RT and Sputnik to placate Washington, Congress turned the heat up more, apparently leaking the larger base list of 2,700 accounts. Classic, leaking this to get press reports. Reporters from all over started to call Twitter about Russia links. BuzzFeed, working with the University of Sheffield, claimed to find a, quote, new network on Twitter that had, quote, close connections to Russian-linked bot accounts. So this is all the Russian bots. That, you will remember this if you were alive a few years ago, all the Russian bots on Twitter. Twitter internally did not want to endorse the BuzzFeed Sheffield findings. Still, when the BuzzFeed piece came out, the Senate asked for a write-up of what happened. Twitter was soon apologizing for the same accounts they'd initially told the Senate were not a problem. So basically, Twitter gets pressure from the outside, saying there's all these Russian bots and it's Russian election meddling. And then they look into it and they can't find any, or just very few. But they certainly don't see the problem as it's portrayed. And, you'd think that if they had that problem on the platform, the people running the platform would know. Like, just out of, like, just having this in hindsight now, of course, hindsight's 2020, but how can, and actually I'm going to do another episode about how these bogus numbers came out. And I probably want to do the censorship industrial complex before that, because that explains all the organizations that were involved. But you have the University of Sheffield, right? No offense to anybody living in Sheffield or I actually know somebody from Sheffield. But that's not a high profile university. And BuzzFeed, of all places, fucking BuzzFeed, right? And they, how can, back in the day, I was thinking this because Twitter was very quiet on this, right? And now I know why, but Twitter was very quiet on this, and you had sources like this saying, oh, there's this Russian bot problem, and then Twitter isn't doing anything about it, which even back then I thought it's kind of against their, not that I wanted them to do anything about it, I thought it was bogus as well, but it was obviously against their interest because they were getting flack, like massive flack in the press. And now we know why. Because like they couldn't replicate it with their data, and they have the data, they're the source of the data. How can the University of Sheffield possibly from the outside have better data on this than Twitter? And we know now that Twitter was trying to, they were actually incentivized to find this shit. And I think they would have found it if it existed, because they were incentivized to find it and delete these accounts and show the Senate that, look, and the press, look, we're fighting this. But they couldn't. So what they did is they agreed anyway that the problem existed, even though they couldn't find it. But like they were under so much pressure from Tony Soprano, and now be even more overt than just suggestions, that they went, right, we can't find this problem, but let's just pretend they're right. And let's just start deleting accounts. It's basically what they did, I guess. Yeah. So basically, the US government and the press convinced each other that this problem existed, and then pressured Twitter into compliance with new policies designed to combat this imaginary problem. And they did this by, paper trail. Basically, these stories in the press shamed Twitter into doing it. And that's what, PR people and journalists, although journalists if they're good, they shouldn't be, this is a problem for journalism. So what paper training is basically you punish. So it's largely something, I guess, the government does. So there's a company who, like, you're a politician, or you're the part of the government, or the government, and you want to get a company to do something. I mean, you can always legislate, but that takes long and whatever. Or let's say, like in this case, you can't really legislate this. Then what you do is you basically work with the press by leaking them stories and information, and especially I guess intelligence services can do this, to basically shame. To give the company bad press, right? And shame them into doing this. So this is why it's called paper training, because you use the papers, the press, to train your adversary, kind of whacking them into line. And of course, this is, if you're a journalist, this is really bad, because this is the press. This is what you never want. Like, if you write a story like this as a journalist and it turns out to be part of a campaign like this, it's, in my opinion, one of the worst things that can happen to you, one of the most shameful things, because, as I talked about in the past, no, I'm at a loss for words. Great. I keep trying to want to say the goal of the press, but that's not what I want to say. Like your responsibility, the responsibility of the press is to keep the government on its toes. And if you're part of a paper training campaign like this, then basically the government uses you, the press, the journalist, to accomplish some goal, right? To shame a person or a company into doing something. And of course, this isn't specific to the government, right? You can also, let's say you are a film studio and some celebrity actor is doing things you don't like, and stuff about their personal life. You can leak that to the press, and you can paper train this person to toe the line, right? You can. Well, at first you don't even have to do anything. You go to them and say, stop doing this. Let's say you are, I'm just making this up. I'm just making this. It was just an example. But let's say you're Disney and you got Star Wars, and you have a new Star Wars trilogy coming up, and you got a new actor that's going to be your new Luke Skywalker, your new hero for these 3 movies, right? And then you start filming, maybe one movie comes out, and then it turns out that actor is has some really unpopular views. Like, everybody's going on about global warming and And this guy just loves meat. Like, everybody's going, oh no, we have to be vegan. Everybody has to be vegan. This guy just loves meat, and it's just bad press for you. Then you can go and say, John, or whatever the guy's name is, John, stop with that shit. Just shut up about what you're eating, right? And if you don't, we know shit about your life and who you're screwing behind the back of your wife that you really don't want to come out. And then you can kind of blackmail them into submission. And if they're ornery and they still go on with the meat eating, whatever, talking about that, then you just leak some of that to the press, and then you paper train them, right? And then they get the backlash, and then you go, see, next time just do what we want you to do. So it's not specific to, I guess, the government or anything like that. But as a journalist, I guess if you're the rainbow press and you're writing stories like this, you don't care anyway. But as a journalist, this is basically it makes a mockery out of your job. You're supposed to stick up for the people against the government, not being used by the government to further agendas that are not in the interest of people. Like in this case, censoring their opinions on the internet because the government doesn't like them. Or as Taibbi sums it up, this cycle threatened legislation wedded to scare headlines pushed by congressional intel sources, followed by Twitter caving to moderation asks, would later be formalized in partnerships with federal law enforcement. Twitter soon settled on its future posture. In public, it removed content, quote, at our sole discretion. Privately, they would offboard, quote, offboard anything, quote, identified by the U.S. intelligence community as a state-sponsored entity conducting cyber operations. Twitter let the U.S. intelligence committee into its moderation process. It would not leave. Wrote Crowell in an email to the company leaders, we will not be reverting to the status quo. So kind of, as much as I didn't like Twitter, or as I don't like Twitter and the way this whole shadow banning and all of this shit, all the censorship came out, you kind of, in this case, you kind of feel, I kind of can't help but feel sad for them because, they were confronted with this problem that they couldn't confirm was a problem. And then they got pressured into, they were actually looking and they were like, we can't find any of this Russian meddling. And then they were just pressured into doing it anyway. And not only that, but they were basically pressured into this whole FBI belly button thing, right? To have this censorship apparatus installed, however indirect, suggesting things. But really the counter argument to this isn't really censorship. It worked, right? People were visibility filtered, stories, news stories. The Biden laptop one is probably the biggest one. People were disappeared off Twitter. So it largely worked. Like, Twitter did what the government wanted it to do, reinforce government narratives and disappear stuff that goes against that narrative. So at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters. It doesn't really matter. Kind of like, in the case of Nazi Germany, it doesn't really matter if Hitler said, signed a piece of paper that said, kill all the Jews, or if people just, set this Holocaust machine in motion because he was saying that's kind of what he wanted. It doesn't matter. You're the head of the government. You're responsible, right? Nobody would take that as an excuse in that case. So I find it weird. This is yes, the scale of the problem is not comparable at all. We're talking millions of people are dead in comparison to, especially very innocent people, as compared to just a few tweets or a few thousand, million tweets, doesn't matter, deleted. It's like the scale is completely different. But I'm trying to explain here is that, that excuse doesn't fly. That's not an. It doesn't matter how this worked. It worked. Like, the end result is obvious, and it's still working because we have no evidence that Twitter stopped doing this. We have no evidence that any other social network stopped doing this. And all we see would suggest that they were doing it. So, before I end on this topic, I think if you listen to all of this, there's now obviously the question, where did this data come from? Why, how, like, who fed this stuff to the FBI and parts of the government? Like, where did this information on these Russian influence and other foreign influence accounts and meddling and bots come from, if it wasn't real? And I think that's going to be a topic of an upcoming episode. I'm not saying here, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Russian interference didn't happen. Of course it happened. Like, of course there was Russian propaganda. There's, as much as there's U.S. propaganda. There's every state. There's German propaganda. Every state issues propaganda. Every company issues propaganda. We just call it PR. Individual people, everybody does it. It's, most people just call it public relations. Propaganda just means to propagate a message. And that's that's a large part of what the government does, right? The government has a position, the government has a policy, and the government needs to make sure that the public thinks that it's doing the right thing, because that's how it reassures re-election. We talked about this in the last episode about how democracy works, right? If you want to be successful as a government, you have to get the majority of your voters thinking that you're doing the right thing. And to do that, you need to propagate your message, i.e. propagandize. But like, I'm gonna talk about this whole thing, the censorship industrial complex. I don't know if it's going to be one episode or several. And then we need to talk about like these NGOs, the very sadly academia involved in this, like stuff like this very infamous Hamilton 68 dashboard. Taibbi did a whole takedown on that. So basically, just to sum it up quickly, what they did is they took a list of accounts and basically manufactured that these were connected, like to Russian, oligarchs or people in the government or whatever, or like also in other cases, like there's some they had a list of supposed propaganda accounts for the Chinese government, and you got on that list by following like 3 official accounts of like Chinese government officials, which, there are a million reasons why you would do that. Maybe you're just interested, or you're a journalist. Like, I've talked about in the past how dangerous it is, not only on this podcast, but like how dangerous it is, and this has been going on for years, especially on Twitter, to go, somebody follows somebody, now they are like kind of complicit. Like, if you follow Donald Trump, that must mean that you're influenced by Donald Trump, so you're like an actor for like Trump or whatever. Right? You could just be a journalist. I had this huge thing back in the day. This was before I was running this podcast. When people started to create these I ended up on a lot of to be blocked by a lot of people, because there were people creating software that you could run that would look at anybody following certain accounts and then ban them automatically. And in my case, this was back in the day. This goes back to Gamergate, and then in my case, it was because of Milo Yiannopoulos, who was later obviously got kicked off Twitter. But like there was this program that lots of people would use, where it would go and from their account, ban anybody who was following Milo. And I ended up on a ton of people. I was surfing Twitter, and I would there would be somebody would be quoting a tweet, and I wouldn't be able to see the tweet. Somebody I follow would quote a tweet. And I would go why can't I read this tweet? It says you're blocked by this account, and I'm why am I blocked? I don't even know this person. And I started investigating this, and it turned out that I was on one of these block lists because I followed Milo, because I'm a journalist and I was writing about this issue. So it's very dangerous and very dumb to go somebody follows somebody, so that you follow 3 Chinese officials, you must be a Chinese propagandist. And they literally did this. This is this is what Hamilton 68 was basically doing. And so they came up with lists of thousands of accounts that were basically Russian foreign influences in their foreign influences sounds wrong, Russian government propagandists, where they would go okay, Twitter needs to ban these accounts. They're all Russian spies. And then, the reason Twitter couldn't verify this is because they didn't use this insane methodology. Or the same thing is how they came up with lists of bots, where they would just go have certain reasons. If your account, followed certain people or did certain things, then you were a bot. And so in this, I'm going to talk about this in detail, obviously, on an upcoming episode, but this would, Taibbi would check this stuff, and he would get the list, and he would just go through the list and see accounts that just by the account name didn't look like they were bots. They just how you can kind of tell what's even I can do that a lot of the time. The obvious bots are very obvious, and then some people are very obviously people from their usernames, right? And then he would just contact them. And he would I guess write them a DM and then contact them and ring them up. And Taibbi has he's talked about this on podcasts a lot. He's so I'm ringing up this person who, according to, I don't know, some Stanford list, is a Russian bot. And I have a person, and it was there were people, one was one supposed Russian propagandist bot account was a car dealer in North Carolina or whatever. Obviously, a car, you go to the profile on Twitter, it's they didn't even check. It was just it's bullshit lists that they came up with, and this is how this whole thing happened. But we're gonna talk about that in detail, obviously, in the upcoming episode. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a insight in that, because I guess that's interesting. It's kind of needed as a background for today and how this whole came about. But basically, parts of the US government wanted to censor certain things. And this is not a conspiracy theory in the sense that I'm saying this, or Taibbi or anybody saying is they planned this. You can see how it organically developed, how certain things were planned. This foreign influence task force was set up, and then they started doing things, and then it just happens. They got connected, and it kind of worked, and then they got other government agencies also wanted to. They were saying, "Oh, look, the FBI is pulling stuff off Twitter that they don't like," and then State Department or the NSA goes, "Hey, we would," or the CIA goes "We would like to do that too," and then of course Twitter actually in some cases connected them with the FBI, and that's how this whole thing organically evolved. So in the end, we then have a censorship apparatus. It's not the Soviet government censorship apparatus. It's, as we will also see in an upcoming episode, the censorship industrial complex. There's companies involved. There's NGOs and foundations, which are basically companies. It's just people making money. So there's and so this all came about kind of organically. Yeah, and obviously this is still. This Twitter file stuff's from the end of last year. And the reason why I'm I'm talking about this year is that it's woefully underreported. That most of the reporting about this was how it's bullshit, and Matt Taibbi is like a right-wing nut job doing the bidding of Elon Musk. Which, even if he is, this is still an important story that's well sourced, and that, the main players have not denied, the FBI hasn't denied that this was going on. Like Joe Roth and the Twitter people involved who've been interviewed a lot about this, they have downplayed this, they've deflected it. Nobody has denied that this was going on, because it's obviously was going on, because, Elon Musk and Matt Taibbi didn't make up all these emails. And during like a few weeks, they were, releasing this. This is obviously legit internal communication at Twitter that Twitter didn't make up. And it's like believable enough, because it's not like, if you were make this evidence up, you would actually make it much more straightforward with, the FBI actually giving orders. Probably this is all this is just the right amount of Twitter fighting it in the right circumstances, and then they go, well, it's kind of no use. Now we have to kind of do what they say. It's very believable. This is what makes me so flabbergasted about this whole story. It's obviously true, right? So sorry, I just clicked something wrong and temporarily broke my camera, which, if you're listening to this on a podcast, then you don't know what I'm talking about, but I just quickly need to fix this. So it's, I don't know, I don't really fix it, but let's run with it. So this is obviously not wrong, right? It's obviously true. There's no reason why, as a journalist, you would focus on. There's no reason I can understand why, as a journalist, you would focus on criticizing this and picking the story apart instead of just reporting it. I mean, there are many reasons. We talked about them in the past, but as a good journalist who can think critically, I'm kind of, I'm almost at a loss for words. I cannot imagine how Matt Taibbi feels. You have a story like this, you break the story of the decade. And you made some minor mistakes, as everybody does, but it's undisputed. The facts are not disputed. Even the most ardent critics of this thing, the Twitter files, are not disputing the facts. They're just attacking the people involved or trying to argue how it doesn't matter. It's mind-boggling. Anyway, we're gonna have some more episodes on the Twitter files, I guess. Don't really know when. But for now, that's it. And let's get to the feedback section. As you know, your feedback is very important to me. Please go to privatecitizen.press, which the website tells you how to get feedback to me. Email, encrypted whistleblower, contact form, anonymous as well, of course. The forum, many people do that on the forum. But yeah, it's very important to me, so please do that. And we had quite a few people contacting me. This is all loosely in response to the previous episode. But first, I got a tweet from Dennis Mansell. I think he's from the Netherlands. At least he lives in Amsterdam. So Mansell, I guess my Dutch is very bad, even though I grew up very close to the border. But anyway, he sent me a link to a company, because I was talking about democracy and how I have this theory that the democratic process is often applied to things that have nothing to do with democracy, i.e. not running a government. And I was talking about how you wouldn't run a company like that. But he sent me a link to a company that is apparently, I think it's from Spain. It's called Mondragon Corporation. I actually didn't check. Yeah, it's Spain. And they are apparently run under democratic principles, as Dennis says. Not everyone's paid the same wage, but it's one man, one vote. I was actually, I'm very interested in this. I want to look into this more. I haven't had the time. I just wanted to acknowledge that Dennis sent me this, and I think it's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, that was just an example, right? I wasn't saying, just in case people misunderstood that you couldn't run a company kind of by democratic principles, but it wouldn't be democracy, because as I tried to explain in the episode, at least to me, democracy is only concerned with running, not even running so much as, also running, but also electing the people, figuring out which people are running a government, basically. And this is actually something that Fadi Mansour in the forum replied about the previous episode. He says, your point of view is that democracy refers specifically to a way to structure government, which is the original definition, and you do not agree with the definition creep that seems to be happening. For me personally, I would tolerate this. I think he means the definition creep, as long as we agree on what we are talking about. Yeah, and that's often my problem with this kind of thing. I'm not per se against, as Fadi, I guess, is using the word democracy or democratizing something for something else than a state or running a government. Given that there's no misunderstanding, but I studied linguistics and I know and politics, and I know how humans behave, and the problem is specifically why I'm against that is specifically that there's a misunderstanding, right? That was the whole point of the episode, that a lot of people don't seem to understand that is what democracy is, and that if you say, well, you have a say in how we design our furniture, when IKEA calls that the democratization of furniture, it has literally nothing to do with democracy. It's something completely different. And I mean, that in itself wouldn't be so much of a problem. People would just be misunderstanding that. But it leads to, and that's what I was trying to say, the deeper problem is it leads to people also misunderstanding democracy. Or applying it to science and then don't understanding science. Well, stuff like that. Right. Fadi continues, but on the other hand, the interesting point that you raise is the reminder that consensus does not equal truth, which I totally agree with. We might expect that, provided some condition, consensus would approach truth, in air quotes. These conditions would include something like free access to all available data and giving equal rights to participants. And from this comes the importance of a free press for democracy. I mean, I agree with you on the importance of the free press. I'm just not, from my point of view, having studied the Third Reich, among other things, I would never expect that, given access to all available data, the public consensus would approach truth, because there's always propaganda and there's always politics. So, in the case of the Nazi regime, I don't think the Nazis got to power largely because the public didn't have access to all available information. Right? So at the time where the Nazis were in power or were getting into power, Hitler had written his book that had been out. You could have read that, and there was stuff in this book that even back then, with the information you had back then, not having the internet or the press as widespread as it is today, and the government controlling a lot of the information, there was already obvious, like if you were thinking critically, the forces that Hitler was blaming for the problems of the German population, among them, the Jewish population, it, like, even with limited access to the information he had back then as a voter, back then in the Weimar Republic, you could have known that this was not the problem, right? There were way too few Jews living in Germany to be the problem, and to have or even like everywhere else to have caused, like, basically the German economic problems, which were largely caused through World War One, the Great Depression, and just the way the German government was not prepared to deal with this. So, like, this is all things you could have had access to. Nonetheless, a majority of the German population voted for the Nazis, and that's how they got to power. So, and that's not the only example. I mean, there's lots of examples today. I mean, that's one of the the great naivetes I had when I was younger. I was thinking, the internet gives us access to all this information, which would improve all these kind of things. But we have learned that is just not the case, right? The internet gives you access to lots of information, but also lots of misinformation, or lots of ways to misinterpret that information. So yeah, I don't think, I really don't think that the access to the available data plays into this. It doesn't even really matter how much. I personally think, this is my personal opinion, I don't even think it matters how much information you have access to. Your way of thinking, I think, is much more important. If you are trained to think critically, then it's much easier for you to spot dangerous things, or dangerous developments. It's not so much about, like, the information you have as your ability to process what information you have, which is why I think education is so important, because you basically have to arm people. You have to give people the tools to see through propaganda and to fight it. And I think those tools I have learned in the last, 20, 30 years that I've been actively paying attention in my life. I have learned that this is less down to, like, the available information, but that's my opinion. Anyway, Fadi ends with, for me, the sign of a good episode is how much it triggers thoughts. And for me, several topics jumped to mind. But now, when I'm writing this, I start to forget the context. Please bear with me with this apparently random thought. Although I have re-listened to the episode again after writing the initial draft of this feedback, but still I have gaps in my memory. Fadi, please don't worry about this. I mean, you're putting way more effort in than I could ever expect, like re-listening to parts of the episode. I certainly know the feeling. I always have a notebook handy. I always have several notebooks handy. I've got, like, notebooks everywhere. I've got pens everywhere. So when I listen to podcasts, I very often will make notes, and otherwise I would. And even then, I often miss things I can't remember. There's so many podcasts I've listened to where it's like, oh, I have to do a Private Citizen episode on this, and then I forget. Or like I listen in the car and I can't write it down immediately, and then I hear something more interesting later on and then I forget and it's gone. So please don't. It doesn't matter. I appreciate your feedback. It's great feedback, and it helps. Just talking about it again and it's very important also for me to clarify what I said in the episode, because sometimes it gets misunderstood, which is necessarily it's probably not your problem. It's because I didn't word it good enough, so it gives me a chance to readdress it, which I think is great. Also on the forum, a new member called Not Dead Just Slop, I think in reference to one of my favorite streamers on Twitch, Deadly Slop. Anyway, Not Dead Just Slop's right. I gave the science argument as part of this democracy discussion. And Not Dead Just Slop says, I have to say your assessment of the scientific process is incorrect. And he goes on. And I actually have to say, I don't think it was incorrect. I think the problem here is that I oversimplified, but we'll see. I have to say your assessment of scientific process is incorrect. We're not going to prove a hypothesis. See it more as an evidence gathering operation. We are supposed to be weighing information gained in an experiment in the context of a hypothesis. Normally, a null hypothesis is no different between groups, usually control and treatment groups. When we get a significant difference, there is evidence to reject the null hypothesis, not that our proposed hypothesis is true. The null hypothesis still could be correct, but in this instance, the way we have approached the test, we have confidence to reject. When we continually test a system over and over, and we gather enough evidence against the null hypothesis, then we can conclude, in fact, that our proposed hypothesis is true. Well, as true as anything can be in science. Important point. I view the theory of evolution in this light. While still a theory, enough evidence has been presented that I can confidentially reject the null hypothesis that evolution has not occurred or is not occurring. Several points on this. I think I can kind of tell that you're approaching science probably from a medical point of view, because, saying control and treatment, the two groups, which, it's always a control group, but in other experiments you wouldn't have a treatment group, but it doesn't matter. But I kind of read that. What you're saying there is is true. That's how you approach. I especially like saying, see it more as an evidence gathering operation. That is very true. I haven't termed it that specifically, but I think I've talked about something like, the scientific. I did an episode on the scientific method a while ago, and why I didn't use this term. That is kind of, I think, how I often think about it as well. But I think my problem in that episode, in the last episode specifically, was that this was just an offhanded example, and I was very, very, I was trying to simplify the scientific process, right, to make it understandable, because God knows most people don't understand it. And I think if we go on about like a null hypothesis, most people just zone out immediately. And also, depending on what science you talk about, first of all, there are several problems with the null hypothesis, and sometimes you just don't have one. Let me explain. So if we use your approach, which is a good approach, especially if you're when you're doing science, like, my wife does, she does medical, biological, biology, science experiments. She designs an experiment, right? That's what she does. She designs an experiment, and she has a hypothesis, and then you can have a null hypothesis, and then as you say, you can test both against each other, but you can control the whole, that's I don't know what you call it, hard science, classic science, when you actually have an experiment. Now, your approach, I think, falls apart when we're talking about stuff like evolution, because you're saying the null hypothesis is that evolution has not occurred, which I don't think it is. Depending on what your null hypothesis is, it's easy to disprove enough that we can say, yes, Darwin's theory of evolution is probably more likely. I can't remember what this other example is, but you always get that in school. So there was a guy who was a contemporary of Darwin who had an alternative theory that was like, I think it was like giraffes have like long necks because basically the fruit growing high up makes them like kind of develop long necks, right? Whereas Darwin's theory of evolution is like about evolutionary pressure and that influencing mutation, right? So you have a random mutation, and most mutations get weeded out of the gene pool because they're, the detriment. But like then you have a mutation where, some animals' neck grows a little bit longer, and that like gives it an edge, in the fight for survival. It gets some fruit that the other animals doesn't, so it breeds. And so this mutation, because it is successful, this mutated animal, which usually, the mutation would be detrimental, so it dies out, it can't reproduce. Because it dies before it can reproduce. If it actually has an edge in survival, it's more likely to reproduce more. And so there are more animals with this mutation. And so over a long period of time, if this mutation is really beneficial, it will take over in the gene pool, and then it get exaggerated. And so you get, at the end, you have an animal with a really long neck. But so in Darwin's theory, it's kind of like this pressure, evolutionary pressure, or survival pressure, kind of working on a random thing. And this other guy was saying, well, it's not random, it's kind of like, I don't know the specifics of it. But anyway, that null hypothesis, it's relatively easy for us to say, well, Darwin's theory, if you look at the available data, Darwin's theory makes a lot more sense because, we have the Mendel rules of like, how genes propagate and all this kind of stuff. So, but if you have like the null hypothesis that evolution doesn't occur, in my eyes, is too easy to disprove, right? The more harder problem would be like there's this alternative theory of evolution, and that's like the actual thing we need to disprove. So it's kind of hard to pick. Like sometimes it depends on what you're picking, what your null hypothesis is, right? So another example I had in the episode was like global warming, right? So if your hypothesis is that global warming is man-made, a really easy pick for a null hypothesis, or relatively easy, would be global warming doesn't exist. Like there's no global warming happening, right? To me, that is something I'm relatively confident we can disprove, because we're in a period where it's getting warmer and warmer. The question is this because of changes that humans have created, or is it because, I don't know, we know that over millions of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, the temperature just on the planet goes up, and then it goes down again, and it goes up. Like, for me, like, it's much harder to disprove the null hypothesis that this isn't just a naturally occurring warming of the planet, than it is if you pick the null hypothesis there's no global warming happening. So that it's very different there. And yes, I guess, your point would be that science is like this, and you have to pick all of these different null hypotheses. And I think that is an approach you can take, but I don't know. I feel like often in practice, this is not specifically how it works. Like, it's more like, yes, you're actually trying to prove a hypothesis. I think what you're actually referring to there, or what you're rebelling against, is that I made it sound that like you can prove a hypothesis. Of course you can't. Like that's one of the points. Like before I did the episode on the scientific method, I did an episode on what actually is a fact, right? So, and you can never really, doesn't matter how much empirical data you have, you can never in a scientific way prove that something is absolutely completely true, because science is always somebody coming along with a better theory and that winning out over over the null hypothesis or whatever, over the other theory, right? So you can never ever actually say that you prove it, you can never actually end on proving a hypothesis. But what you're trying to do is you have a hypothesis, and what you're trying to do is you're going, this is the currently true one, right? And you are trying to do that. So it doesn't really was it Einstein who came up with the black hole theory, but or was it Hawking? I don't know. Let's say you come up with the black hole theory. It's not so much about what would be, is there a possible other, while you're doing that, that's your new theory, right? You're not going is there a possible other solution to this problem? You're not saying, you're not trying to say, well, a black hole exists and the alternative is black holes don't exist. What you're actually trying to do is you're saying this is a good explanation of what is happening. I feel like that's more the process. I understand where you're coming from, and I think, yes, when you're running an experiment, that's what you're trying to do. But the problem is that often the science we are confronted with today, the science that is the scientific discussions we're having, where we're going, this is a political, this controversial, is specifically because these are problems where we can't run an experiment, right? You can't run an experiment to prove or to fortify your theory that Darwin's evolutionary theory is right, because the time scale involved is so big that you can't, it's too big. You can't look at it. You don't have the data from back then, and you can't run the experiment because the time frame's so big. Same with the Watson and Crick model of DNA, right? We don't have microscopes that have a high enough resolution that can show us this kind of stuff, because the current microscopes we use, we shoot electrons at stuff, and this is there's small, these things are so small that if you shoot electrons on them, they just you influence what you're trying to see. So that's when the trouble basically I was talking about comes in. Those are the things that are the problem in society that we talk about, that are topics on the show, right? If you specifically trying to figure out what some kind of cell does, and you design an experiment, then it's all, I'm not saying it's easier, but it's all more clear cut, and it's more about having a null hypothesis, right? And this is, it's much clearer if you're running an experiment where you're trying to prove that a drug does what you think it does, right? So your hypothesis is, I've designed an experiment. I'm giving this, I have mice that I've genetically engineered to have atrial fibrillation. I don't even know if you can actually do that, but would be the kind of experiment that my wife would be doing. You have a gene line of mice that have been specifically engineered to have this heart problem, and you have this hypothesis that giving this certain compound would prolong their survival. Then your null hypothesis is that it doesn't prolong their survival. Your hypothesis is that it prolongs their survival. You have a control group that doesn't get the compound, and you have a treatment group that gets the treatment. And then you just run this experiment, for a sufficiently long time. You gather data, and at the end you can say with a certain confidence that yes, this compound does this to mice. And then you have the question, does it do the same thing to humans? Is there maybe what happens if they get another like if they have other drugs? There's like all these other questions, but for this very specific question, you can answer that, right? But the trouble comes in when you we're talking about climate patterns of the planet, right? And you just can't collect that much data, and that's not what people are doing, right? They're running computer models. Then this is like completely different, and that was kind of where my point was going. That science is not like getting away from this detail point. That science is not a consensus based. Like the scientific method doesn't care about consensus. It's more the opposite, right? You have scientific breakthroughs. Is always people who have a theory that goes against the consensus, which turns to be out the better theory. So saying that something is true because a large majority of people, be they experts or otherwise, think it is true is very much not the scientific method, right? It's how you arrive at the scientific consensus, yes. And, this is how in the body of scientists a theory is evaluated. And, this is how scientific journals work. And but like it doesn't prove facts. And that's what my point was. Like that's the misunderstanding people. Like you would prove, so somebody has a theory, publishes a paper, explains their methodology. As a scientist, you don't lend more credence to the theory by lots of your colleagues saying, yeah, that looks good. What you do is you run that experiment, or you run another experiment, and specifically you're trying to disprove their theory. And it's kind of like information security. You don't know, like you can design your algorithm, whatever, your encryption algorithm. It's not like there is no way of like kind of, you do all your math, right? But you can't mathematically prove that this algorithm is secure. And you don't arrive at a good encryption algorithm by going, oh, lots of cryptographers agree this is a good algorithm. I mean, people do that, but it's as dumb as this same approach with science, because evaluating if something is secure, like an encryption algorithm, works over time, right? It's just by people banging on it. When you have 20 years of people trying to crack the Rheindal cipher and they can't do it, then you are approaching a consensus where you go, well, our best cryptographic minds have tried to break this for 20 years, so we're pretty sure it's secure, relatively secure, right? You don't go like, oh, well, lots of companies use this, or lots of people agree it's secure, thereby it's secure. You can do that, but that's dumb. And you also, like in science, you're never sure it is actually secure, because tomorrow somebody could come along who has a very cool idea who can actually break this cipher, and then you fucked. And that's how science works. If tomorrow you can have 70 years or whatever long it is of people going, hey, the Watson-Crick model, or like 150 years of people going, well, evolution is the best theory. Somebody comes along with a better theory. That moment, it doesn't matter that for 120 years, 99% of biologists agreed. At that moment, when somebody comes along with the better theory, that's the better theory, and all the odd stuff's out the window. That's what science is like. Yeah, as Gamertron says in hello, by the way, in Twitch chat, it's more like I built this, break it as fast as you can. Exactly. So good cryptographers will actually do it like they word it that way, right? They don't go, hey, I built the best encryption algorithm. They go like, I built an encryption algorithm that I think is good. Could people please bang on this for a while and tell me? So yeah. Anyway, we also, in reply to my episode, I'm trying to get through this. It's been going on for a long time, but I haven't released the podcast in a while, so it's gonna be a long one. Steve B also replied, "This is different. So in the this is not about the actual topic of the episode, which was like this, what I called the democratic delusion, or all of this science, whatever. This is in the episode. I read out feedback by Steve B, who is from Canada, and commented on some journalism stuff I talked about, and he specifically commented on the public broadcasting in Canada and how it's like government funded or not. So I replied to that feedback, and now he's replying to my reply to his feedback. It's very meta. Bear with me, but I think it's going to be interesting. Anyway, Steve says, "My comments regarding my government, Canada, my government and government-funded media was more about the irony of them having a fit about the labeling, by Twitter labeling them government-funded, by them having a fit about the labeling, despite the fact that they wrote and released the document stating that they were government-funded. They could have just shrugged and carried on as normal, but they went into toddler tantrum mode over it." Good way of putting it. Back in the 70s and 80s, wait, let me get some more coffee here. Back in the 70s and 80s, they actually made some really good content with the money that the government gave them. These days, they get a lot more money, and most kindergarten classes could produce better content. While I do personally believe it is time for my government to stop funding them, it is more about economics than the fact that they are the propaganda department of the government here. Yeah, that's kind of, when I would talked about the German public broadcasting, that's kind of my point. I don't specifically mind them forcing me to pay for it. What I mind is the content I get in return, which is shit. Like, there's literally only one show. I've been paying for this shit for 20 years, and there's like one show I really like they made with that. That's some like really cult, like Northern German. It's called, in case you're from Germany, it's called Neues aus Büttenwader, which like nobody watches, like some Northern German crazy weird like farmer show, but it's really good. But it's like literally the only thing. So I don't really also mind that. I just what I take offense at, especially as a journalist, is them kind of going, well, we're doing the right thing for the people, and they're kind of insinuating that the people would agree, when it's obvious that if they just went to a model where you only paid if you wanted, they would be immediately bankrupt. Like they would get like 1% of what they are getting now. Right now, they basically get every like from all the Germans who have a job and make a decent amount of money, they probably have like 90% or 95% are probably paying this fee of households, and it will go to like me, like anybody doing anything on the internet and asking their listeners for support. That you get, like, if you're really good, you get 1% of listeners paying, but it's more like 0.1%. So it's more that's what I actually take issue with. Like they're basically propagandizing. They're lying. They're going like, I think they're lying because I think they know. I mean, they must know. They must have done some market research or whatever. It's obvious that they would lose almost all of their funding, and they're just pretending that people are paying this because they believe in their content, not because. Basically, it's not really the government forcing you to, but basically the government is protecting a system where they're forcing you to, right? Where they send people to your house if you're not paying. Anyway, back to Steve. If the government really wanted to produce content, they could fund programs in schools and universities to both create the content and the business aspect of doing so. And while the content would likely be better, they would also be preparing people for future careers. That's an interesting idea. The truth of the matter is, I don't feel the government here should be spending those billions of dollars on things. That's billions of Canadian dollars. That's like 10,000 US dollars. No, I'm just joking. like a Deadly Slop joke, who's also Canadian. You should not be spending those billions of dollars on things that do not contribute in a positive or useful way to our society, especially given the current state of the economy. I realize that Canada is a first world country, but we have the following issues that we are not dealing with. Our government-run healthcare system is in shambles and running on skeleton staff, while many workers have been banned from working in healthcare due to ongoing vaccine mandates. After 45 years of living in the same city, I no longer have a doctor. Many villages do not have clean or safe drinking water, which is a campaign promised to fix from Mr. Trudeau at every election. Vast areas do not have high-speed internet. I can physically see city limits from my house, but have 1 megabit per second speeds on a good day. There's no mass transit once you leave large cities. I think Amazing Race just did a show on this. The electrical infrastructure is having more and more frequent outages, and electric cars haven't even really taken off where I live yet. I could keep going, but the point is that we have a lot of current and upcoming problems that we are ignoring while spending monies in areas that there's no return on. And this is a good example why I love getting feedback, especially from listeners all over the world, because you hear interesting things like this. Very, very, telling that we have this. Apart from the water problem, we certainly don't have the water problem. Germany has amazing drinking water. I mean, I'm drinking tap water right now. Like, tap water in Germany is better than bottled water in most countries. Pretty much any country. It's probably better than bottled water here. But we don't have that problem. We have all the other problems. Our healthcare system is shit. It's going to shit, government-run healthcare system. We have infrastructure problems, especially with roads. I mean, our internet, I think, is a bit better than in Canada, but that's, we're a very small country. And Canada has the problem that, like Australia, they have a lot of their population concentrated in the cities, and then they have very few population that's spread out everywhere. And it's like, that's always a problem, right? I mean, we have some of that problem in Germany, but Canada's just a scale that blows your mind because it's a much bigger country. And how many citizens does Canada have? Let me just check. Citizens, Canada. Number. I don't want to become a Canadian citizen. Thank you very much. What's Canadian nationality law? I want to know how many citizens Canada has. Jesus Christ. Total area, population, 39 million. So a lot less than Germany, about half. And Germany is much smaller. So, yeah. So, not comparable, but some of the problems are the same. I mean, our electrical infrastructure is shit, probably for other reasons. I mean, we just probably because we turned off the nuclear power plants and more electric cars and stuff like that. But, yeah, very interesting. Thanks for the feedback, Steve. I appreciate that a lot. I appreciate to hear from everybody. So if, especially in different living situations, if you would just want to chime in with stuff like that. I'm actually I forgot one feedback that I actually put in first and I read over it. Because I had Butterbeans writing me an email, which was a very nice email. He said he's glad I'm back producing shows. After he sent me that email, didn't produce the show that week. I'm sorry. But very nice. Also, Butterbeans, thank you for writing. And he also sent me very interesting. So he's from Tennessee. He used to work for VW, I think. So he's interested in the German economy. He sent me an article from Bloomberg about the German economy that I thought was very interesting and kind of, I didn't put it in the feedback because it kind of fits in with something I want to do an episode on anyway. Especially with like the Ampel and my episode on that, the German government and what they've been doing. So yeah, I'm going to talk about that. So, the economic problems we have here as well, which are tied to the power grid problems as well. It's like very interesting. So I'm going to talk about that in the future. Anyway, thanks for writing in, everybody. Please, if you're considering to send me feedback, please do. You can also specify that I don't talk about it on the show. That is, and I won't do that. That's part of journalist ethics that I still uphold one of the few people, I guess. So please do, Private Citizen Press. The details are on there. And with that, let's get out of here. I need to get this show out. So, as I say, this podcast is, I love doing it, and I appreciate very much the people who enable me to do it, because, I'm a freelance journalist. I don't make that much money, and every cent helps. And there are a lot of generous people who sign up to my Patreon, and they're chiming in every month. If you don't want to do that, if you want to PayPal me a one-time sum or whatever, get in contact. We can also do that. But like, the Patreon supporters are very much appreciated, because they kind of keep this little income stream going that, tides me over some lean time sometimes. It's really cool. So that's the value for value model as pioneered by the No Agenda Show, which means you get this completely for free. No strings attached, and you don't have to feel bad if you don't support the show, but you can monetarily, or you can just write in feedback, become a producer that way. But I'm very lucky that I have producers that provide monetary support, so I would like to credit them, and I will credit them. I can do whatever I want, but I will do that now. So many thanks to my showrunner, Sir Gold Terran, who's been with me for a long time. No Agenda royalty, that's where the Sir comes from. Fellow brown coat. You can't see it on the video right now, but I do have, for the people who are watching the video, I have a brown coat flag, independence in the background, kind of hanging in my home gym, behind the kickboxing sandbag, kind of like Jane style. Anyway, Sergo Taran, a fellow brown coat, aim to misbehave. Thank you very much. Also, thanks to my executive producers, One Eye 11G, Butterbeans, who wrote me that nice email, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Rizal, and Sandman616. And then there's my supervising producers, Avis, Bennett Piatra, Dave, IKN, Jackie Plage, Jonathan M. Hitai, Krunkle, Michael Mullen Jensen, Robert Forster, and Tobias Weber. Or Tobias Weber. Got no idea. Whatever. If you want to specify how I should pronounce your name, please do that as well. Private Citizen Press. Contact details are on there. My producers, Andrew Davidson, Astral C, Barry Williams, Cam, Captain Egghead, David Potter, Dirk Didi, Fadi Mansour, Florian Pigorsch, Joe Poser, Mika, Mr. Amish, and RJ Tracy. And associate producers, D. Jonathan, Johan Sonen, Kai Sears, Ricky M, Steve Hose, and Vlad. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to being there. And also thanks everybody who's subscribing on Twitch, by the way, now that I'm streaming here again. That helps as well. I also have to thank Bytemark at bytemark.co.uk. They're a UK cloud hosting company. They are providing the service and the bandwidth to get you the podcast files. I couldn't do the show without them. And that's it. I'm now signing off with a song by Big Girl, who has become my favorite artist on Epidemic Sound, especially the one of the most popular new artists on there as well, I think. She's amazing. Love Big Girl. You can also find her on Spotify if you want to check out all the music. This song's called Sweet Revenge Is Your Lullaby, and it's right down my alley. I love this song. So, I'm going to play us out with this, and having mentioned brown coats before, aim to misbehave. See you soon with another episode.
I see you with your tangled hair, hiding behind the curtains of your own despair. No one found you, no one tried to lullaby. The tears fall down your precious face, banished into the shadows of your own disgrace. Forgive them, but they feel no shame. If only they knew you held the golden flame, the sweet sound of demons calling out your name. Burn it down, the whole city child. Burn it down and everything inside. Sweet revenge through your song, and it goes through the night. Hear the cries for miles and miles. See the smoke stretch to the sky. Burn it down, the whole city child. Sweet revenge is your lullaby. Your lullaby. Sweet revenge. Oh, oh, sweet revenge. Sweet revenge. Down. Burn it down, the whole city child. Burn it down and everything inside. Sweet revenge through your song, and it goes through the night. Hear the cries for miles and miles. See the smoke stretch to the sky. Burn it down, the whole city child. Sweet revenge is your lullaby. Your lullaby.
So there we go. Stopped recording. Save that file. I love when you discover somebody, like discover their music, you like their music, and then like you kind of feel like they're a person who's down your alley, and then you look them up, and like motorbike, tattoo, I'm a Fender girl. It's just it's my kind of it's just my kind of person. And I just love her voice. I mean, she's great. I really like. Probably the hottest artist on Epidemic Sound right now, and by that I don't mean the way she looks, although she's also very hot. But she's also very successful on Epidemic Sound right now, which I think is cool. So go to Spotify, listen to her music. She's amazing. Banging the microphone. Indy, thanks for subscribing. By the way, obviously I didn't go into that on the show. Did the alert work? I didn't. I mean, I heard the alert. Was there like a was data on screen? I guess I can go back in the VOD and have a look, but I didn't know. Yes, it did. That's good. I'm just making sure it all works. I haven't streamed for so long, right? That it's like all. I don't know. How are things down? Is it Isle of Wight? I always forget. On the beach. How are things on the beach? I always see your pictures, and I'm very envious. Data appeared. That's good. That's good. We want that. So Isle of Wight. Yeah, it was. That's the one close to the. I was almost at the mainland. God, where's that? It's down in the south, right? It's like next to what's it? Southampton? Let me just look this up on. Yeah, that's the Isle of Wight. Yeah. I think I was down there once. We did a trip down there through the. What's that? What's it called? The you know, the wells or whatever, like the nature, the South Downs. That's it, the South Downs. And we went to the coast, so I think I did see the Isle of Wight. Yes, I do need to plan it with. I was telling the wife on it. The wife wasn't against it. We definitely want to do that at some point. It's really cool. It looks like I'm actually first thing I'm going to Liverpool, though. I think my dad. We're talking about. I'm turning 40 this year in August, and he wants to give me tickets to a LFC Liverpool game in Anfield. So I'm gonna have to sort that out. But the Isle of Wight is next. Definitely want to go. Right, I'm gonna sign off here in a bit to get the show out, and I still need to write a column. But I'll be back tomorrow at 10 my time. I guess that is what's that, 9 UK time ish. I'll be playing tomorrow for like, I don't know, 10 hours, 8 hours. Gonna play Diablo 4. So if you're up for that, then come hang out tomorrow, I guess. Yeah. So you're a Liverpool fan, yeah? I kind of am as well. Like Premier League wise, I mean, especially with Jurgen Klopp, my dad really likes him. Of course, like, you know, I'm gonna have to contact Dan and see if we can meet up. I always wanted to go to Anfield, so yeah. So that'll be cool. I don't really know when yet, but we'll see. In the obviously next season. All right. I think that's it. I think I'm gonna sign off, and by that I think I'm gonna rate Halifa, because Halifa is playing Cyberpunk right now, and she looks like she's hot. Looks like it's well. That came up. Well, she's also hot. What I mean is, like, it looks like it's warm in Copenhagen. Don't tell her I said that. All right, we're gonna raid her now. Don't make it awkward. All right. Thanks for watching. See you maybe tomorrow. Thanks everybody who dropped by, and say hello to Alifa, and don't tell her I said that. All right? Didn't say that.